All right, we're going to take a look at 13.7 number 1, and we have now seen all three of our trig function graphs. We're going to start to relate the sine and cosine and describe their translations. So before we start describing translations, we are just going to talk about the general form of sine and cosine graph. So general form of a sine graph is y equals a, which represents your amplitude, sine. And then in parentheses, x minus h. H represents your horizontal shift. And then plus k. K represents your vertical shift up and down. And when we get into these sine and cosine graphs, since they're periodic and they keep repeating, the h is called a phase shift, because there are certain phase shifts where the graph may turn from a sine to a cosine, or it may turn from a sine, or it might be a sine that is similar to another type of sine graph, but phase shift is what we call the h. So that is a new term to represent that horizontal movement. And then with the same idea, your cosine, y equals a cosine x minus h, and where I'm using x, you could also use theta, so either way is fine, and then plus k. So anything in the h, x minus h moves to the right, x plus h moves to the left, and the k is going to be shifting us up and down. So looking at our first section here, we are just going to determine where the graph shifts. So each of these graphs are represented in function notation. So I'm just looking in these parentheses. This is where my h value would be, is right here. I'm just going to describe whether it's plus or minus, if it's shifting to the left or to the right. So first, x plus 1. So I'm thinking of this as x minus a negative 1. So that means my h is negative 1. And that means that this is going to be going to the left 1. X minus 3, that means that my h is 3, because it's in that x minus h form, and this means that I'm shifting to the right 3. So similar to every function we've talked about all the way back to when we did absolute values, the h is going to shift you left and right. On to part C, sine x plus pi. So that means my h is negative pi. I'm thinking of that as opposite of how I see it there. And then this is going to mean that I'm going left pi. And lastly, I've got cosine x minus 5 pi over 7. So h value is going to be 5 pi over 7. And that's going to mean I'm shifting to the right. And as we get to each problem in today's practice, we will also see the k value shifting up and down. But there's your general form of sine and cosine. The h is also called a phase shift, and minus is going to shift you to the right, and plus will shift you to the left.